It's my feel-good breakfast show.
Welcome back to your Feel Good Breakfast Show on the 1st of September. Happy Spring Month and Day, and also Happy Heritage Month. Now listen, this month is not only about food, music, and about dressing. It's about asking who we are and how we actually belong. Now in South Africa, identity has been fractured by history, yet constantly reshaped by migration, as well as memory and everyday culture. Now for many, African identity is both a claim and a question. What unites us and what keeps us apart? Belonging can't be assumed. It actually has to be built in families, in schools, and of course in communities.
Yep. Now this is quite a loaded one actually if you think about it. So with us to unpack these ideas, we have Prof. Suren Pillay, the Director of the Center for African Studies at UCT, and then Felicity Harrison, the Head of Sustained Dialogues at the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation. So firstly, good morning to both of you. How are we doing this morning?
Very good. Thank you.
And Happy Heritage Month.
Thank you. Happy Heritage Month. I'm so glad that you came through on a significant month like this. Of course, both contributing in your own departments. But Prof, I think I'll start with you when talking about this in particular, African identity that we mentioned a little bit earlier. I'm really curious how different it is today than what it was imagined when democracy first started.
You know, there was always that moment when at democracy, we almost had to remind ourselves that we live in Africa.
Yeah.
And for so long, South Africa was imagined itself belonging to another part of the world. So what's been really exciting is that I think we've come a long way, that we have no questions now about where we are located. And that's really exciting because it's opened up both how we see everything around us. In South Africa, you know, especially we were kept apart, but also across the Limpopo. It's so exciting now to see so many young people exploring the continent, so many influences coming in, things are traveling, people are moving, music is entering, our cultural identities are shifting. So that's really, I think, a world that has opened up, not just, you know, towards one part of the world, which we were oriented, but really the exciting possibilities of one of the most dynamic continents in the world. So that's fantastic to me.
Very
Absolutely
exciting.
is fantastic. I always feel like South Africa especially is like, it's the future of the world in terms of how dynamic we are, how intermingled everything is and what's going on here. Felicity, maybe I can ask you this, obviously being someone from the Institute of Justice and Reconciliation, I believe, what are the conversations within the communities happening there with regards to what belonging looks like in South Africa? What does that actually mean and what's being expressed there?
I think it's a really important question because most people don't feel as if they belong. They feel alienated and different. And this is very much a legacy of apartheid and colonialism and slavery. And so what we do is we try to reimagine and reignite people's sense of belonging to ethnic groups, to language groups, to racial groups, to cultural groups. But at the moment there is very much a sense of alienation. I don't belong because I speak a language or I look a certain way or I come from a certain culture. And we have made some strides in the last 30 years, which is very important, but we've still got a long way to go.
Absolutely. But I do want to talk about a little bit of the legacies of some of the things that you might have mentioned as well. Prof, maybe I can come to you just talking about how apartheid basically shaped citizenship, but also shaped culture in many ways. So how are we still seeing the legacies of this carried on today?
They're very powerful legacies. Of course, the most obvious one is where we live and where we continue to live and do the people around us look like us or not? How much diversity do we have in our communities? And we recall, of course, how very powerfully and for how long that spatial segregation, the segregation of where we live, where we eat, where we went to school, that continues in such a strong way. In the Cape, of course, we know, you know, since the 1930s at least, there were these very deliberate projects to keep certain people out of the Cape, to turn the Cape into a certain kind of, if you like, at the time in Verwoerd's mind, a kind of colored Bantustan. And we live with those legacies, with the tensions in our communities now, because we have, of course, since '94, people are free to move, people are free to look for better opportunities or to look for jobs, and the cities are changing. We have migrants that have entered the cities, but we also have South Africans who have been kept out of our cities, who now naturally have come into the cities. So those, I think the legacies of spatial segregation are very important and very difficult, I mean, continuing, as Felicity was saying, to shape how people think of themselves. And of course, that affects all kinds of things about perceptions, about stereotypes. If you're not, mixing or not socializing or not just hanging out with people of a certain generation, of a certain type, you develop certain ideas about people that are true often or not true often. So those kinds of, I think, legacies continue. And of course, I think, language is a big part of I think, our separation. We're making some strides. I'm very excited about things that are happening in the universities with the adoption of, policies we have to say we all have to speak multiple languages, and that's very exciting. But that's still something remains a challenge that I think once we can cross the borders and boundaries of how we speak to each other, in which languages we speak to each other, and where we're living, we will go there. But of course we do have those very, very real challenges that we face.
Well, a great conversation, and I thank you both for being here. And they're not going anywhere. We've got a part 2 to look forward to, where hopefully we can start talking about some more practical advice to move, to fit in, to belong, and to celebrate, more importantly, our heritage ahead of Heritage Month, which has officially begun. Before we get into that conversation, though, let's head to the kitchen and maybe fill up those bellies.
It's my feel-good breakfast show.
Oh, yes, welcome back, you beautiful people. Opening up on S3 right now to some incredible conversation. Yes, it is spring, it has sprung, it is Heritage Month, and we've been discussing something very, very important. We asked what African identity means, and we got to discover just exactly that. But now let's ask how to make it real. And belonging obviously needs practice, and that's through education, culture, and dialogue that changes how people live together. Now, our guests are returning to share what's working and how we can each contribute to this very important factor going on right now.
Absolutely, and we do all have a role to play, and thank you guys once again for playing yours so incredibly well. But Felicity, I'll start with you when it comes to this. Maybe just shine a light on something in particular, one story maybe that really highlights the dialogue about identity and sort of shows how things can shift when people have the conversation. Do you have anything that pops up for you?
100%. So before COVID, we had a project which encouraged people from different race groups to come together to share a meal. And this is because in South Africa, most of our interaction between people of different races happens in the workplace or in the public place, but there are very structured hierarchies in these places. And where we meet each other the least is in our homes, over meals in social areas. So we bring people together, and I think that what we saw there was people saying, I have never had a meal with a black person or a white person or a colored person, or I never knew how similar we were. And those are the kinds of interactions where you really see in real time how people just being able to human with each other, to be able to share a meal together, can actually have incredible insights into other people, and that's what we need to be doing a lot more of.
I love that, human together. That's
Yeah, I love
great.
that. When I think of humans being together, though, I think of my time at varsity and how much we mixed and mingled with so many different people. Prof. Pillay, obviously universities are almost like key sites of identity debate, to call it that. What would you say is an important factor with regards to universities? Do you think that they might be the ones being able to really identify and determine that identity of an African?
I think the most important thing about the university is that it's occupied mostly by young people, and that the future of the
world
of the world
Yeah.
really relies on how young people think and be together. And the amazing thing about our universities, most of them are public universities where students are coming from all over the country. And that's an opportunity for the first time for many students to encounter each other on more or less equal footing, where there are peers sitting in a classroom talking together and bringing the diversity of their experiences, their neighborhoods, the far-flung areas that other people have not heard of, where, that's really where I think we're building the kind of bonds that are genuine, they are not forced, they're organic, and they are making friends, and those are friends for life, and those are people that they are imagining things with. I see that in the kind of projects that students are are thinking about when they leave the university. What will they do together? What kind of activities? Whether whatever area of life they engage in. So I think that's really exciting. Where and the role that the university in a way plays is that not just what the learning, of course, in the classroom, what we teach and what we read, but also just the kind of spending time together, getting to know each other, talking, debating, disagreeing, and also...
And that for me was the lived experience, man. Like, you come to a varsity and you meet people from all across the continent and the world.
That's right.
You are so humbled and so educated in the same time, because you have no idea what people do and what it takes for them to get into that same seat that you're sitting in right now.
Yeah.
And everybody has their challenges, and you really start to respect that journey.
Yeah.
You start to respect what people go through to try and get the same thing that you're trying to achieve. And it's crazy to really think back on that and think about how many friends I now have because of this reason. So, hey, get your kid in varsity if you want to let them expand on worldly views, because it gives you a complete different perspective. It'll burst that bubble that you came from, for sure.
And I think we also find that we're more similar than we are different.
Yeah.
I mean, we are both in interracial relationships. And I find at the base of it, like you said, human's human. And once you remove all the other things out the way, you just relate to each other at the base level of who we are. But in the work that you do, Felicity, what lessons do you take from your work of reconciliation and also justice that, more South Africans could maybe take a note from and take a page from when relating to each other?
I think it's being curious and listening to understand, and taking a step back from your own experience. And when you speak to somebody, believe them when they say that this is their experience, and not kind of say, well, that's the exception. And I think it's about listening, and listening in a way that we try to break down the stereotypes and the biases and the preconceived ideas that we have, and just have a cup of coffee with your colleague, and find out and use different languages and be curious about other people's culture, because most people don't actually mind answering questions, and just show an interest in other people and how they do things differently.
I love that.
Open up yourself to the world is what you're saying, essentially.
100%.
Open yourself to the potential of change, and I think that's where we learn the most. That's where we have an opportunity. If you had the opportunity to maybe encourage a youngster right now that was living in a box to see the world, what would be your best recommendation in order to do so? How would one really garner the experience and the global experience to be humbled by variation and difference?
I think, we have so much information around us, and we have so many public institutions like museums and galleries and other things. I would just say we need to, especially with young people, in a way, to understand a certain kind of history, where history is not just for us a kind of burden, but actually we live through, we encounter that difficult past, and that's where the future lies. When you realize what we've come through, what we've been able to build together as a society, that's a really exciting thing for young people to encounter, I notice, when they have not been exposed to that. So I would just say, we have all of these public institutions around us. They are often, we see lots of tourists in them, but I would say just go out and step into them and encounter that past and see what's there, and that's where, in a certain way, a certain kind of future lies, I would say.
You both speak so passionately about our future, and that being the youth and the youngsters that you get to work with, and I'm sure you see so many different mindsets there. How do you see that difference in what older people view South Africa in terms of this diversity, and how young people perceive the future and the potential of South Africa? Do you see a difference? I'm hoping you're going to say yes. And if so, can you kind of give me an idea of what that looks like from a youngster's point of view? Because that really is what's bound to materialize, I hope.
I think that what we see in our research and in our field experience is that there is much more of a sense of being South African amongst the younger group of people. Apartheid and colonialism kept us apart. And so when we do research, often it's your language, it's your ethnic group that people first identify with, as opposed to being South African. But we are finding increasingly there is a sense of South African identity. We're not quite sure what that is, but but there is a sense of it being us being South African, and also that this is important for us and our children.
You think it's DNA, but it's RSA.
Yeah, it is also something that you, to your point, you can learn, you can embrace, and definitely maybe unlearn some things that have been passed down through generations. Thank you both so much for coming through.
Thank you.
Hopefully not the last time, and we definitely need to continue this dialogue and conversation, because as we said, it takes practice and definitely takes some pushing from all of our parts. We all have a part to play, so let's get into it.